The telegram arrived at Professor Penelope Brighton's Boston office on a Tuesday morning in March 1879, promising 3 times her usual consulting fee if she could travel immediately to Fort Davis, Texas, and authenticate a collection of pre-Columbian artifacts that had supposedly surfaced from a mine outside town. Penelope studied the words through her wire-rimmed spectacles, noting the sender's name, Ethan Sadler, proprietor of the Sadler Ranch and Mining Company. She had never heard of him, but the amount he offered suggested either desperation or wealth, possibly both. At 24 years old, Penelope had built a modest reputation as one of the few women in America with expertise in Native American antiquities, having studied under her late father at Harvard before his unexpected death 3 years prior. Since then, she had survived on consulting fees, though most came from Boston museums paying far less than what this Texas rancher proposed. She sent her acceptance within the hour. 2 weeks later, after an exhausting journey by rail and stagecoach, Penelope found herself standing in the dusty main street of Fort Davis, a frontier settlement nestled in the Davis Mountains of West Texas. The town consisted of perhaps 30 buildings, most constructed of adobe or rough-hewn lumber, clustering around a central square where a weathered fountain stood dry in the afternoon sun. Beyond the town, mountains rose in purple shadows against an impossibly blue sky, and the air carried the scent of sage and dust. A tall man approached from across the street, his boots kicking up small clouds with each step. He wore clean denim trousers, a cotton shirt rolled to his elbows, and a brown leather vest that had seen considerable use, but remained well maintained. His hat, a wide-brimmed affair typical of the region, shaded a face that appeared to be around 28 or 30, with sun-weathered skin, sharp gray eyes, and a serious expression that softened slightly as he removed his hat. Professor Brighton. His voice carried the slow drawl of Texas, but his diction suggested education beyond what she might have expected from his appearance. "Miss Brighton is sufficient," Penelope replied, extending her gloved hand. "I assume you are Mr. Sadler." "Ethan Sadler, yes, madam." He shook her hand with surprising gentleness, as if conscious of his own strength. "I appreciate you making the journey. I know Boston is considerably distant from Fort Davis. Your telegram suggested urgency and generosity." Penelope retrieved her hand and gestured to her trunk, still sitting on the stage-coach platform. "Shall we proceed to examine these artifacts?" Ethan's expression shifted, something cautious entering his features. "First, I think we should discuss the situation more thoroughly. I have a room reserved for you at the boarding house, and I thought perhaps dinner might allow for proper conversation." Penelope felt a flicker of irritation. She had traveled over 2,000 miles, enduring cramped trains and a particularly harrowing stagecoach ride where bandits had been rumored in the area. She wanted to see these artifacts that commanded such extraordinary fees, not make polite dinner conversation. However, she recognized that frontier manners might differ from Boston customs, and antagonizing her employer before beginning work would be unwise. "Very well," she agreed, "though I would like to at least glimpse the collection today, if possible." "Of course." Ethan replaced his hat and lifted her trunk as if it weighed nothing, which Penelope found privately impressive given that she had packed it with several reference books and her authentication equipment. "The boarding house is just down the street. Mrs. Chen runs it, and she is quite particular about dinner being served promptly at 6, so we have about 2 hours. The boarding house proved to be a 2-story structure with a broad porch and surprisingly well-maintained gardens, a testament to considerable effort given the arid climate. Mrs. Chen. A woman in her 50s with keen, dark eyes and an accent that spoke of her Cantonese origins, greeted Penelope with brisk efficiency and showed her to a clean room on the second floor with a view of the mountains. After washing away the worst of the travel dust and changing into a fresh dress, Penelope descended to find Ethan waiting in the parlor, still in his work clothes but with his vest brushed clean and his hair dampened and combed back. He stood when she entered, that same careful courtesy evident in his posture. "The artifacts are at my ranch, about 3 miles from town," Ethan explained as they walked toward the dining room. "I did not want to transport them unnecessarily until you had a chance to examine them in situ." "Sensible," Penelope acknowledged. "How did you acquire them?" Ethan held out a chair for her and she sat, noting that the dining room contained 4 other boarders, all men who watched her with undisguised curiosity. A woman with her education and profession was apparently uncommon in Fort Davis. "My men found them while excavating a new shaft in one of my silver mines," Ethan said, taking the seat across from her. "About 6 weeks ago. The foreman, Carlos Mendoza, he is a good man with considerable experience, recognized that they might be valuable and stopped work immediately. He sent word to me at the ranch house, and when I saw them, I knew they were beyond my knowledge to evaluate." Mrs. Chen appeared with plates of roasted chicken, potatoes, and surprisingly fresh vegetables. Penelope realized she was famished, but she maintained her professional demeanor, asking questions between bites. "What specifically made you believe they required expert authentication?" Ethan cut his chicken with precise movements, considering his words. "I have lived in West Texas most of my life. My father moved here in 1855, established the ranch when I was 5 years old. I have seen native artifacts before, found pieces in the mountains, traded with the Mescalero Apache when that was still possible. These items feel different, older, more elaborate, and frankly, Miss Brighton, they feel too convenient." Penelope's fork paused midway to her mouth. "Too convenient." A mine shaft collapses slightly, revealing a hidden chamber containing dozens of intact pottery pieces, jewelry, ceremonial items, all in remarkable condition despite apparent age. Ethan met her eyes directly. "In my experience, when something appears too good to be true, it usually is. I need to know if these artifacts are genuine before I make any decisions about them." "Decisions?" Penelope set down her fork, her appetite temporarily forgotten. "What sort of decisions?" "If they are authentic, they belong in a museum where scholars can study them and the public can appreciate them," Ethan said simply. "If they are forgeries, I need to know who placed them in my mine and why, because that suggests someone is attempting to manipulate me, and I do not take kindly to manipulation." Penelope found herself reassessing the man across from her. She had expected either a treasure hunter hoping to profit from selling artifacts to collectors, or perhaps an ignorant rancher who had stumbled upon something valuable and wanted to ensure he received maximum payment. Instead, Ethan Sadler appeared to be neither greedy nor foolish, which made him considerably more interesting than she had anticipated. "Your attitude is refreshingly ethical," she observed. "Most men in your position would seek to profit from such a discovery." "Most men in my position did not have a father who taught them that the land holds stories older than our claims to it," Ethan replied. "And that respecting those stories is part of respecting the land itself. My father was many things, not all of them good, but he understood that much." There was something in his tone, some shadow of old pain, that made Penelope want to ask more questions. However, professional boundaries existed for a reason, and she had not traveled to Texas to explore the emotional history of her employer. regardless of how unexpectedly intriguing he might be. "I would like to begin my examination first thing tomorrow morning," Penelope said, returning to business. "I will need good natural light and a secure space where I can work undisturbed. My authentication process is thorough and may require several days." "Of course. I will have my foreman prepare the ranch office. It has excellent windows and a large table." Ethan finished his meal and set down his utensils. "I should warn you, Miss Brighton, that my ranch is working property. You will encounter cowboys, mining operations, cattle, horses, and all the associated noise and activity. If you require absolute silence, I can attempt to make arrangements in town." "I have worked in far more chaotic environments than a ranch," Penelope assured him. "During my time at Harvard, I authenticated a collection while construction crews renovated the floor above me. I learned to concentrate through considerable distraction." Ethan smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed his serious features into something warmer and more approachable. "I suspect you are considerably more resilient than your Boston polish might suggest, Miss Brighton. I suspect you are considerably more educated than your cowboy appearance might suggest, Mr. Sadler," Penelope replied, surprising herself with the slight edge of flirtation in her tone. His smile widened briefly before he contained it, but something had shifted between them, some recognition of mutual respect that had not existed at the beginning of the meal. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the boarding house with a wagon and a younger man he introduced as Tommy Fletcher, one of his ranch hands. Tommy appeared to be perhaps 19, with an easy smile and the lean build of someone who spent their days in hard physical labor. He treated Penelope with shy courtesy, loading her trunk and equipment with careful attention. The ride to the Sadler Ranch took 40 minutes over rough terrain, and Penelope used the time to observe the landscape. The Davis Mountains presented a stark beauty quite different from anything she had experienced in the East. Vegetation clung to life with determined resilience, and wildlife appeared in fleeting glimpses. A roadrunner darting across their path, a hawk circling overhead, and once in the distance, what might have been a small herd of pronghorn antelope. Ethan drove the wagon with relaxed competence, one hand on the reins while he pointed out landmarks and explained the history of the region. Fort Davis itself had been established as a military post in 1854, he told her, to protect travelers on the San Antonio to El Paso road from Apache raids, though the fort had been abandoned during the Civil War and only regarrisoned in 1867. "The Mescalero Apache have been largely displaced now," Ethan said, and Penelope heard regret in his voice. "Forced onto reservations or pushed into Mexico. When I was a boy, my father maintained good relations with several bands. He learned their language, traded honestly, respected their territories. But after the war, more settlers arrived and the military took a harder stance. Violence escalated on both sides. You sympathize with them," Penelope observed. "I sympathize with anyone forced from their home," Ethan replied. "My father was Irish. He emigrated to escape famine, watched people he loved starve because of policies that favored English landlords. He understood displacement and injustice. That understanding shaped how he approached this land and the people who had lived here for generations before we arrived." Penelope found herself even more intrigued by this thoughtful rancher who spoke of historical injustice with genuine awareness. In Boston, such conversations occurred in university halls and at intellectual gatherings, but she had not expected to find similar consciousness in a Texas cattleman. The Sadler Ranch sprawled across a valley between two mountain ridges, with the main house constructed of adobe and timber, surrounded by a complex of barns, corrals, bunkhouses, and other structures that spoke of a successful operation. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and Penelope could see several men working with horses in a large corral near one of the barns. Ethan helped her down from the wagon with that same careful courtesy, his hands firm at her waist for just a moment before releasing her. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. "The office is this way," Ethan said, seemingly unaffected, though Penelope noticed a slight color in his cheeks that had not been there a moment before. The ranch office proved to be exactly as promised. A spacious room with large windows facing east and north, providing excellent natural light. A substantial wooden table dominated the center, and shelves lined two walls, filled with ledgers, books, and various ranch records. The room smelled of paper, leather, and the faint tang of ink. "The artifacts are in the storage room connected to this office," Ethan explained, crossing to a door in the far wall. He produced a key from his vest pocket and unlocked it, revealing a smaller room without windows. "I have kept them secured since their discovery. Only Carlos, Tommy, and I have keys." Penelope followed him into the storage room, her professional excitement rising. Wooden crates lined the walls, perhaps a dozen in total, each carefully sealed. Ethan opened the nearest one, removing the lid to reveal straw packing material. "I will leave you to your work," Ethan said. "However, I would appreciate if you called for assistance before attempting to move the larger crates. Some are quite heavy." "Mr. Sadler," Penelope began, then paused, uncertain how to articulate the sudden reluctance she felt at his departure. "Thank you for your conscientiousness in preserving these items. Many men would have simply plundered the find. You are welcome, Miss Brighton." Ethan replaced his hat, which he had removed upon entering the office. "I will send Tommy with lunch around noon, and please do not hesitate to request anything you need." After he left, Penelope stood in the quiet office for a moment, composing herself and pushing away thoughts of gray eyes and careful hands. She had work to do, professional reputation to maintain, and no business whatsoever entertaining romantic speculation about her employer, regardless of how unexpectedly appealing he might be. She turned to the first crate and began her examination. 3 hours later, Penelope sat back from the table where she had arranged 24 pottery sherds, a complete bowl, and 3 ceremonial figurines, her mind racing with contradictory observations. The pottery displayed characteristics consistent with several pre-Columbian cultures of the Southwest. Design elements similar to Mogollon painted wares, construction techniques resembling Hohokam methods, and decorative motifs that suggested possible influence from Mesoamerican cultures further south. The problem was that these various characteristics should not exist together in a single collection. It was as if someone had studied multiple cultural traditions and attempted to create artifacts that incorporated elements from all of them, resulting in pieces that felt simultaneously authentic and impossible. Penelope picked up her magnifying glass and examined the bowl again, looking for tool marks, signs of artificial aging, or any indication of modern construction. The pottery appeared genuinely old, with natural weathering patterns and mineral deposits consistent with centuries of burial. The pigments used in the painted designs matched those available to ancient peoples: mineral oxides, plant-based dyes, and clay slips in the correct color ranges. Yet the combination of styles remained wrong. She had spent 6 years studying Southwestern archaeology with her father, poring over collections in university museums, reading every published paper on the subject. These artifacts did not fit any known cultural pattern. A knock at the door interrupted her analysis. Tommy Fletcher entered with a covered basket, his young face friendly and curious. "Miss Brighton, I have brought lunch. Boss said you might be too focused on your work to remember eating." Penelope realized she was indeed hungry, having skipped breakfast in her eagerness to begin. "Thank you, Tommy. Please set it on the desk there." The young man did so, then hesitated, clearly wanting to ask questions but uncertain if he should. Penelope took pity on his curiosity. "Have you seen the artifacts yourself?" she asked. Tommy's face brightened. "Yes, madam. I was there the day we found them, working in the mine with Carlos. It was remarkable, like discovering treasure from an old story." "Tell me about that day," Penelope said, uncovering the basket to find sandwiches, fruit, and a canteen of cool water. "How exactly did the discovery occur?" Tommy settled onto a chair near the door, his expression animated. "We were excavating a new shaft, following a promising silver vein that had appeared in the main tunnel. Carlos had us working carefully because the rock formation seemed unstable. Around midday, part of the shaft wall collapsed inward, revealing a cavity behind it. At first, we thought it was just a natural cave, but when we cleared the rubble and brought lanterns to look inside, we saw the pottery sitting on stone shelves, like someone had arranged a display." "Stone shelves?" Penelope asked sharply. "Natural formations or constructed?" "Constructed, madam. Flat rocks stacked and mortared with some kind of clay mixture. Carlos said it looked like a burial chamber or a storage room, intentionally created." Penelope's mind raced. "Were there any human remains?" "No, madam. Just the artifacts. That is what made it so strange. Carlos said burial chambers usually contain bodies, or at least signs that bodies had been there. This chamber was empty except for the pottery and other items." "What happened next?" "Carlos immediately stopped work and sealed off the chamber. He sent me to fetch the boss while he stayed to make sure nothing was disturbed. Mr. Sadler arrived within the hour, examined everything, and ordered the artifacts carefully removed and transported to the ranch. He shut down that section of the mine until he could figure out what we had found." "That must have been expensive," Penelope observed, "halting mining operations." Tommy shrugged. "The boss said some things matter more than silver. He said if we had found something significant from the people who lived here before us, it deserved respect and proper handling, not destruction in pursuit of ore." Penelope found herself warming to Ethan Sadler even more, which was becoming a distraction she could not afford. She forced her attention back to professional matters. "Tommy, during the excavation and removal, did you notice anything unusual about the artifacts themselves? Any signs that they might have been recently placed in the chamber?" The young man considered carefully. "No, madam. Everything was covered in dust and cobwebs. The chamber had that old smell, you know, like closed-up places get after years with no air. And the pottery was wedged into the shelves in some places, like settling had occurred over time." After Tommy left, Penelope returned to her examination with renewed intensity. The physical evidence suggested genuine antiquity, but the cultural inconsistencies suggested forgery. Someone could have created false artifacts and placed them in an ancient chamber, but why? What possible motive could justify such an elaborate deception? She worked through the afternoon, documenting each piece with detailed notes and sketches, testing pigments with her chemical reagents, examining construction techniques with microscope and magnifying glass. By the time shadows began lengthening through the windows, she had examined 43 pieces and felt no closer to a definitive conclusion. A knock came at the door, and Ethan entered, now wearing a clean shirt and vest, his hair damp as if he had recently washed. He carried the scent of soap and leather. Miss Brighton, it is nearly 6. I thought you might want to return to town for dinner unless you would prefer to eat here at the ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Garcia, has prepared more than enough for both of us." Penelope looked up from her notes, blinking as her eyes adjusted from close work to distance viewing. "What time is it?" "5:15. Ethan approached the table, careful not to disturb her arranged artifacts. "Have you made progress?" "I have made observations," Penelope replied, hearing the frustration in her own voice. "Whether they constitute progress remains unclear." Ethan studied her face with those perceptive gray eyes. "You are troubled by what you have found." "I am troubled by what I have not found," Penelope corrected. "Clear evidence of either authenticity or forgery. These pieces resist easy classification." "Then perhaps a break would be beneficial," Ethan suggested. "Mrs. Garcia makes excellent enchiladas, and my housekeeper's opinions on people who skip meals are formidable. I would not want her displeasure directed at me for failing to feed you properly." Despite her preoccupation, Penelope found herself smiling. "In that case, I suppose I must accept your invitation to avoid causing interdepartmental conflict." Ethan returned the smile with one of his own, and Penelope noticed again how it transformed his face, creating small lines at the corners of his eyes and revealing a warmth that his serious default expression concealed. They walked across the ranch yard toward the main house, the evening air noticeably cooler than midday, carrying scents of sage and mesquite smoke from cooking fires. Several ranch hands called greetings to Ethan, their voices respectful but friendly, suggesting a man who led with fairness rather than intimidation. The main house interior surprised Penelope with its comfortable elegance. She had expected rustic simplicity, but instead found well-made furniture, colorful woven rugs, and walls lined with bookshelves containing an impressive collection of volumes. She noticed titles ranging from agricultural texts to classical literature, including several that she recognized as university-level scientific works. "You are a reader," Penelope observed, unable to contain her curiosity. "My father believed education was the only inheritance that could not be stolen or lost," Ethan replied. "He taught me to read before I could ride, which in Texas amounts to heresy. These are his books, mostly. I have added some, but the foundation of the collection was his." "He sounds like a remarkable man." "He was complicated," Ethan said carefully. "Brilliant and flawed, generous and stubborn, capable of great kindness and terrible anger, but yes, in many ways remarkable." Mrs. Garcia emerged from what Penelope assumed was the kitchen. A woman perhaps in her 40s with capable hands, and a direct gaze that assessed Penelope with thorough efficiency. She spoke to Ethan in rapid Spanish, too quick for Penelope's limited understanding, though she caught words that sounded like questions about preferences and dietary requirements. Ethan responded in equally fluent Spanish, then turned to Penelope. "Mrs. Garcia asks if you have any foods you cannot or do not eat." "No, I am fortunate to have no restrictions," Penelope replied. "Please tell her I appreciate her consideration." More Spanish followed, and Mrs. Garcia's expression softened slightly before she nodded and returned to the kitchen. "She says any woman brave enough to travel alone to Texas and then examine ancient artifacts without fear deserves proper feeding," Ethan translated, his tone suggesting amusement. "Mrs. Garcia has strong opinions about proper behavior, particularly regarding hospitality." They ate in a dining room that continued the house's surprising sophistication, sitting at a polished table set with simple but quality dishes. The enchiladas proved as excellent as promised, complex with flavor and spice that made Penelope's Boston palate wake with delight. "This is extraordinary," Penelope said after her first bite. "I confess, my expectations of Texas cuisine did not include anything this sophisticated. Most Eastern expectations of Texas fail to account for the multiple cultures that have shaped this region," Ethan observed. "Spanish and Mexican influences, Native American traditions, European settlers bringing their own practices. All of it blends together in ways that create something new." "Like the artifacts," Penelope said, the professional concern reasserting itself despite her attempts to enjoy the meal. Ethan set down his fork. "Tell me what troubles you about them." Penelope found herself wanting to explain, wanting to share the puzzle that consumed her thoughts. In Boston, she had few colleagues who understood her work well enough for detailed discussion. Her gender had excluded her from many professional circles, and those men who did engage with her scholarship often did so with patronizing condescension. Ethan, however, listened with focused attention as she described the cultural inconsistencies, the paradox of apparent physical authenticity combined with stylistic impossibility. He asked intelligent questions, seeking clarification without challenging her expertise, and his expression suggested genuine engagement with the problem. "Could these represent a previously unknown culture?" Ethan asked. "Or perhaps a trading crossroads where multiple traditions intersected?" "That is one possibility I am considering," Penelope admitted. "The Southwest was not isolated. Trade networks extended from present-day Canada to South America. Objects traveled vast distances, influencing artistic traditions in complex ways. However, what I am seeing in your artifacts goes beyond influence. It suggests either a remarkable cultural synthesis or deliberate manufacturing to mimic multiple traditions. If they are forgeries, who benefits?" Ethan's question went to the heart of the matter. "I gain nothing from fake artifacts except potential embarrassment. I have no plans to sell them, no desire to falsely claim some historical significance for my land. Which is precisely what makes this situation so confounding," Penelope agreed. "Forgeries require motive. Without clear financial or social benefit, why would anyone undertake such elaborate deception?" They continued discussing the puzzle through the meal and into the evening, sitting eventually in Ethan's study with coffee and the comfort of focused intellectual exchange. Penelope found herself appreciating not only his mind but his manner. The way he considered before speaking, the respect he showed for her expertise, and the absence of any assumption that her gender diminished her authority. Somewhere during those hours, the professional distance that Penelope had carefully maintained began eroding. She noticed the way lamplight caught in Ethan's hair, the unconscious grace of his movements, and the warmth in his voice when he spoke about subjects that engaged him. She noticed, too, that he watched her with an attention that felt like more than mere intellectual interest, his gaze sometimes lingering on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. When he finally drove her back to town in the darkness, the wagon seat seemed smaller than it had that morning, and she found herself acutely aware of his proximity. The warmth of his body in the cool night air, the brush of his sleeve against hers when the wagon hit a rough patch, the sound of his breathing in the quiet. "Tomorrow I will continue examining the remaining artifacts," Penelope said, breaking the charged silence. "I should complete my initial assessment within 3 or 4 more days." "Take whatever time you require," Ethan replied. "Thoroughness matters more than speed." He walked her to the boarding house door, and in the yellow light spilling from the windows, Penelope saw something in his expression that made her pulse quicken, attraction, interest, and an internal conflict that mirrored her own. "Thank you for dinner," Penelope said softly. "And for the conversation. I have missed having someone to discuss my work with in detail. I have missed having someone to talk with about anything beyond cattle prices and rainfall," Ethan replied. "Tomorrow, then." "Tomorrow," Penelope agreed, and reluctantly went inside, feeling his gaze on her back until she closed the door. Over the following 3 days, Penelope fell into a pattern. Arriving at the ranch mid-morning after breakfast at the boarding house, working intensively on artifact examination until lunch, resuming work through the afternoon, and then sharing dinner with Ethan either at the ranch or, once, at the small restaurant in town. Their conversations ranged widely, moving from archaeology to literature, politics to philosophy, personal history to future aspirations. Penelope learned that Ethan had briefly attended university in Austin before his father's failing health called him home to manage the ranch. He had been 21, forced to abandon his education to assume responsibilities he had not yet felt ready to shoulder. His father had died 2 years later, leaving Ethan alone with a struggling operation that he had transformed through intelligence, hard work, and instinct into the successful enterprise it had become. "You regret not finishing your studies?" Penelope asked one evening as they sat on the ranch house porch watching sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. "Sometimes," Ethan admitted. "I wonder what path my life might have taken if circumstances had been different, but regret feels pointless. The life I have built here has value, even if it was not the life I initially imagined." "I understand that," Penelope said quietly. "When my father died, I lost more than a parent. I lost my academic sponsor, my professional advocate, and my protection against those who believed women had no place in scholarly pursuits. I thought my career had ended before it truly began." "Yet you continued," Ethan observed. "I had no alternative that I could live with," Penelope replied. "My father spent his life teaching me that knowledge matters, that understanding the past illuminates the present, that careful scholarship serves truth. I could not abandon those principles just because continuing to practice them became difficult." Ethan reached across the space between their chairs and briefly squeezed her hand, a gesture of understanding and support that sent warmth flooding through her. "Your father would be proud of your persistence." "I hope so," Penelope whispered, not trusting her voice to say more. On the 4th day, Penelope finally completed her examination of all the artifacts, and her conclusions remained frustratingly ambiguous. Every physical test suggested authenticity, correct materials, appropriate aging patterns, proper construction techniques. Yet the cultural inconsistencies persisted, impossible to reconcile with any known historical tradition. She sat in the office staring at her notes, feeling the weight of professional uncertainty. She needed to provide Ethan with clear answers, but honesty compelled her to admit that clear answers eluded her. A commotion outside drew her attention. Raised voices, the sound of rapid hoofbeats, and then Ethan's voice calling sharp commands. Penelope moved to the window and saw several men gathered near the barn, their postures tense. Ethan stood at the center, speaking with a man she recognized as Carlos, the mine foreman. Curiosity and concern drove her outside. As she approached, Ethan turned, his expression grim. "Miss Brighton, I apologize, but I need to attend to a situation at the mine. There has been an accident, minor injuries but requiring my attention. I may be gone several hours." "Of course," Penelope said immediately. "Is there anything I can do to help?" "No, thank you." "Please, continue your work or return to town if you prefer. Tommy will drive you whenever you are ready." Ethan mounted his horse with fluid grace and turned back to her, something unspoken in his eyes. "I will call on you this evening if you are willing to receive me. I believe we need to discuss your findings." "I will be expecting you," Penelope confirmed, and watched him ride away with Carlos and two other men, feeling an unexpected anxiety clutch at her chest. The afternoon stretched endlessly. Penelope tried to work on her final report, but found herself too distracted, too worried about Ethan despite having no rational reason for such concern. Finally, she accepted Tommy's offer of transport back to town, arriving at the boarding house in time for an early dinner that she barely tasted. Mrs. Chen watched her with knowing eyes but said nothing, for which Penelope was grateful. She did not want to examine too closely the depth of feeling that had developed over 4 short days, the way Ethan Sadler had become important to her in ways that transcended professional association. Ethan arrived at the boarding house just after sunset, his clothes dusty and his face showing strain, but he smiled when Penelope met him in the parlor. "Is everything resolved?" she asked immediately. "Yes. A support beam collapsed in one of the tunnels. 3 men caught beneath it, but fortunately, injuries were minor, bruises and 1 broken arm, nothing life-threatening." Ethan removed his hat and turned it in his hands. "Miss Brighton, might we speak privately? I understand the impropriety, but I would value some honest conversation without audience." Penelope glanced at Mrs. Chen, who hovered nearby with obvious disapproval of any suggestion that an unmarried woman should entertain a gentleman in private. However, Mrs. Chen was also practical, and she sighed before gesturing toward the parlor. "You may speak in the parlor with the door open," she declared. "I will be in the kitchen where I can see the doorway. Propriety will be maintained." They settled into chairs positioned appropriately distant from each other, though Penelope wished they could sit closer, could continue the easy warmth that had developed between them. Ethan looked tired, and she wanted to smooth away the lines of tension in his face. "Have you reached conclusions about the artifacts?" Ethan asked. "Yes and no," Penelope replied honestly. "Every physical analysis suggests they are genuinely old, created using appropriate materials and techniques. However, the cultural inconsistencies remain unexplained. I cannot authenticate them as belonging to any known tradition, but neither can I identify evidence of modern forgery." "So we are at an impasse," Ethan said. "Not entirely." Penelope leaned forward, her excitement about an idea that had been forming overcoming her physical awareness of him. "I believe these artifacts are genuine, created by a culture we have not yet identified or understood. The Mescalero Apache and other tribes have been displaced so recently, their oral histories are still intact. If we could speak with elders, learn their traditional stories, we might find references to an older people who inhabited these mountains before them." Ethan's expression shifted, interest sparking in his eyes. "You want to seek out Apache elders, if possible. I know the political situation is complicated, that official government policy has been hostile, but surely some people remain in the area or maintain contact across the border." "I know where to find someone who might help," Ethan said slowly. "Miguel Delgado, a trader who works both sides of the border and maintains relationships with Apache bands in Mexico. He lives 2 days' ride from here, near the border. However, Miss Brighton, such a journey would require you to travel further into frontier territory with minimal accommodation and potential danger." "I am not afraid of discomfort or reasonable danger," Penelope replied. "If there is any chance of learning the truth about these artifacts, I must pursue it." Ethan studied her face for a long moment. "Why does this matter so much to you? You have done your work. You could file a report indicating uncertainty and return to Boston with your fee. Penelope met his gaze directly. Because incomplete answers offend me. Because I believe these artifacts represent something important that deserves proper understanding. And because she hesitated, then continued with complete honesty, because I am not ready to return to Boston and leave Texas behind. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken meaning. Ethan's knuckles whitened as he gripped the arms of his chair, visible tension in his posture. Penelope, he said, using her first name for the first time, his voice rough. I should not say this. You are my employee, here in a professional capacity, and I have no right to complicate matters. But I find myself caring very much whether you stay or leave, for reasons that have nothing to do with artifacts or authentication. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Ethan, don't answer now, he interrupted, standing abruptly. Think about it. Think about what pursuing this research means, what staying in Texas longer means. And tomorrow, if you still want to take this journey, I will make arrangements. He left quickly, as if afraid he might say more, and Penelope sat in the parlor watching darkness fill the windows, her mind and heart in turmoil. The next morning, she sent word to the ranch that she wished to proceed with seeking Apache sources. Ethan's return message came within hours. He had sent word to Miguel Delgado and received a reply that the trader would meet them in the town of Marfa, 60 miles west, in 3 days. Ethan proposed they travel by wagon with camping supplies, the journey taking 2 days each direction. Penelope recognized the potential scandal. An unmarried woman traveling alone with an unmarried man into remote territory. However, her desire to solve the mystery, combined with her growing feelings for Ethan, outweighed conventional concerns. She sent her acceptance and began preparations. They departed Fort Davis at dawn, Ethan driving a sturdy wagon loaded with camping equipment and supplies. The morning air was cool and fresh, and Penelope felt a sense of adventure and freedom that her structured Boston life had never provided. As they traveled, Ethan proved to be an excellent companion, attentive without being overbearing, conversational without filling every silence with needless talk, capable of handling the practical necessities of frontier travel while still treating Penelope with respect. He showed her how to identify edible plants, pointed out wildlife she would have otherwise missed, and shared stories of the land's history with the knowledge of someone who truly loved the place they inhabited. They made camp that evening near a small creek, and Ethan efficiently built a fire and prepared a simple but satisfying meal. As darkness settled and stars emerged in impossible profusion, they sat by the fire drinking coffee and talking with the ease of old friends. Tell me about Boston, Ethan said. What is your life there like? Penelope considered. Busy, structured. I teach occasional classes at a women's college, consult for museums, write papers that are published in journals few people read. I have a small apartment near the university, adequate but not particularly warm. My colleagues are mostly polite but distant. I have acquaintances but few genuine friends. She paused, recognizing the loneliness in her own description. It is a professional life but not a particularly full one. What would a full life look like? Ethan asked quietly. I do not know, Penelope admitted. Until recently, I thought professional achievement was sufficient, that advancing knowledge and maintaining my father's legacy would be enough, but these past days I have felt something different. Connection, engagement, the sense that life can encompass both intellectual pursuit and personal fulfillment. Penelope. Ethan moved closer, sitting beside her on the log she occupied. I know we have known each other less than a week. I know the circumstances are unusual and that I should maintain professional distance. But I would be lying if I claimed my feelings for you were purely professional or that I view you only as an employee. Penelope's breath caught. What are you saying? That I care for you, Ethan said simply. That I admire your intelligence and your courage. That I find myself imagining you staying in Texas, building a life here, and that those imaginings include me. I care for you as well, Penelope whispered. More than I should after such brief acquaintance, more than is sensible or practical. You make me feel understood in ways I have rarely experienced. Ethan reached for her hand, and this time the touch was not brief or casual but deliberate and tender. His fingers intertwined with hers, warm and strong, and Penelope felt the gesture resonate through her entire body. After we speak with Delgado, after you have the information you need about the artifacts, would you consider remaining in Texas longer? Ethan asked. Not as my employee, but as someone I am courting properly and honestly, with the intention of discovering if these feelings between us might become something lasting. Yes, Penelope said, the word emerging without hesitation. Yes, I would very much like that. Ethan smiled, the genuine warm expression she had come to treasure, and lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Then I will endeavor to give you every reason to stay. They sat together by the fire until it burned low, talking quietly and holding hands like young people discovering romance for the first time, though both were old enough to understand the rarity and value of what they had found. The next day's travel brought them to Marfa, a smaller settlement than Fort Davis, consisting primarily of a trading post, a handful of buildings, and a railroad depot serving the Southern Pacific Line. Miguel Delgado met them at the trading post, a man in his 50s with weathered brown skin, keen dark eyes, and a manner that suggested both caution and capability. After introductions, Delgado listened to Penelope's explanation of the artifacts and her questions about older cultures in the region. He spoke excellent English with a Spanish accent, and his responses suggested significant knowledge. There are stories, Delgado said slowly. Among the Mescalero and the Kairacahua, stories of people who lived in these mountains long before the Apache came from the north. They call them the Ancient Ones, say they built homes in cliff faces and created beautiful works from clay and stone. Most of those people disappeared centuries ago, perhaps from drought or warfare or disease. But legends say some groups survived in hidden places, maintaining old ways. Do any of these hidden groups still exist? Penelope asked eagerly. Perhaps. There are rumors of a small band living in the mountains south of the border, very isolated, avoiding contact with outsiders. They speak an old language, practice old ceremonies. Delgado looked between Penelope and Ethan. I know a woman, Rosa Quintana, who trades with them occasionally. She might be willing to arrange a meeting, though it would require significant trust and discretion. Can you contact her? Ethan asked. I can try. She lives 3 days from here, deeper into Mexico. However, I must warn you that such contact is not without risk. These people have hidden for generations because exposure has historically brought destruction. Soldiers, treasure hunters, missionaries, all have threatened their survival. They will not welcome strangers easily. We want only to understand, Penelope said earnestly. To learn their history, verify that these artifacts represent their cultural tradition, and ensure they are treated with respect. We have no intention of exploitation or exposure that would bring them harm. Delgado studied her face intently, then nodded. I believe you speak truthfully. Very well. I will take you to Rosa, and we will see if she is willing to help. But you must follow her instructions exactly. show complete respect, and accept that they may refuse to meet with you at all. The journey into Mexico took them through increasingly remote territory, following trails that seemed to disappear entirely in places, navigating terrain that required all of Ethan's skill as a horseman and Delgado's knowledge as a guide. Penelope found the landscape both beautiful and harsh, dramatic in its extremes, demanding respect from anyone who traveled through it. They reached Rosa Quintana's small ranch on the third day, finding a woman in her 60s with silver hair, strong hands, and eyes that assessed them with the same careful attention Delgado had shown. After lengthy conversation in Spanish with Delgado, which Penelope could only partially follow, Rosa turned her attention to Penelope. "Miguel says you study the work of ancient peoples, that you want to understand rather than take," Rosa said in accented English. "Why should I believe this?" "Many people say they want understanding but really want gold or glory or the satisfaction of revealing secrets. Because I have devoted my life to preserving and understanding artifacts precisely so their stories are not lost," Penelope replied. "My father taught me that every object created by human hands carries knowledge, and that knowledge is sacred. The artifacts we found trouble me because I cannot read their full story. I want to understand not for personal gain, but because I believe these people and their work deserve proper recognition." Rosa was silent for a long moment. "You speak with sincerity, and Miguel trusts you, which counts for much. I will send word to the people you seek. If they agree to meet with you, I will take you to them. If they refuse, you will respect their decision and never speak of their location. This you must swear." "I swear it," Penelope said immediately. Ethan and Delgado added their own oaths. Rosa sent her grandson, a young man named Paulo, into the mountains with a message. They waited at her ranch for 2 days, during which time Penelope and Ethan found themselves in the strange position of extended proximity without privacy. They took walks around the ranch property, careful to remain visible and proper, but their conversations deepened, touching on hopes and fears, past hurts and future dreams. "If you stay in Texas, what would your life look like?" Ethan asked as they watched sunset from a hillside above Rosa's house. "I do not fully know," Penelope admitted. "I suppose I would need to establish some professional presence, perhaps consulting for museums in larger Texas cities, possibly writing. And I would want to continue field research, documenting sites before they are lost to development." "You could work with the artifacts from the mine," Ethan suggested. "Study them properly, document them, prepare them for eventual museum placement. I would provide workspace and cover your expenses." "That would be employment," Penelope said carefully. "You spoke of courting me, not hiring me." "The work would be independent of our personal relationship," Ethan clarified. "I would support your professional endeavors because they matter, not as means to keep you nearby, though I would be lying if I claimed your proximity would not please me greatly." Penelope smiled. "You are remarkably thoughtful for a cowboy." "You are remarkably adventurous for a Boston professor," Ethan countered. Their eyes met and held, and Penelope felt the now familiar warmth that accompanied his attention. They had not kissed, had not progressed beyond hand-holding, and one memorable evening when Ethan had put his arm around her shoulders as they sat watching stars. But the restraint only intensified the attraction, building anticipation that made her pulse race whenever he came near. "When this is finished, when we return to Fort Davis, I would very much like to kiss you," Ethan said softly. "Properly and thoroughly, in a manner that leaves no doubt about my intentions." "I would very much like that as well," Penelope whispered, her cheeks warming. Paulo returned on the third day with word that the hidden people had agreed to a meeting. Rosa would guide Penelope and Ethan, but Delgado would remain at the ranch, as his presence might frighten them given his broader trading network and greater contact with the outside world. They traveled for a day and a half into mountains that seemed untouched by any modern presence, following paths that required dismounting and leading horses through narrow passages between rocks. Finally, Rosa stopped in a small valley where a spring created a pool of clear water surrounded by cottonwood trees. "They will come to us here," Rosa explained. "We wait." An hour later, 4 people emerged from the rocks so silently that Penelope started despite having been watching for them. 2 men and 2 women, ranging in age from perhaps 30 to 70, dressed in clothing that combined traditional woven textiles with more modern cotton pieces. They moved with quiet confidence, and their faces showed wariness but also curiosity. The eldest woman spoke, and Rosa translated her Apache-influenced language into Spanish, which Ethan then translated into English for Penelope's benefit. The conversation proceeded slowly, with careful attention to respect and accuracy. Penelope explained about the artifacts found in the mine, describing their characteristics in detail. The eldest woman listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions through the chain of translation. Finally, she nodded and spoke at length. "She says these items sound like the work of her people," Ethan translated. "They are called the Teopa, descendants of ancient peoples who inhabited these mountains for centuries. When Spanish conquistadors came seeking gold and souls to convert, many Teopa died from disease and violence. Survivors retreated into the most remote regions, breaking into small family groups that avoided contact with outsiders. Her band is one of perhaps 3 that still maintain traditional ways." "The chamber in the mine," Penelope asked. "Could it have been a storage cache or a sacred space?" More conversation followed. "She says it sounds like a hiding place," Ethan translated. "During times of danger, they would conceal valuable items in caves and sealed chambers throughout the mountains, hoping to protect them from theft or destruction. Many such hiding places have been lost over generations as people died without passing on the locations. She believes you have found one of these forgotten caches." Emotion welled in Penelope's chest. Recognition that these artifacts represented not an archaeological curiosity, but the desperate efforts of people trying to preserve their culture against destruction. "Tell her I promise that her people's work will be protected and respected," Penelope said urgently. "That I will ensure they are properly documented and preserved, that their story will be told with honor." The translation produced a long response. "She thanks you but says she has learned not to trust such promises," Ethan translated, his voice heavy. "Too many times, outsiders have promised respect and delivered exploitation. However, she senses you speak truly, and she asks that if you keep these items, you also keep their story. Do not let her people be forgotten or reduced to mere objects in glass cases." "I promise," Penelope said directly to the elder woman, speaking slowly and with complete sincerity. "I will spend my life ensuring your people's history is known and honored." The woman studied Penelope's face for a long moment, then nodded and spoke briefly. "She says time will prove the worth of your promise," Ethan translated, "and that if you betray this trust, the mountains themselves will remember." The Teopa departed as silently as they had arrived, disappearing into the landscape as if they had never been. Penelope felt shaken by the encounter, moved by the weight of responsibility she had accepted. That night, camped again near the spring, she found herself unable to sleep, sitting by the fire and staring into flames while her mind raced. Ethan sat beside her, patient and quiet, until she finally spoke. I feel the burden of what I promised, Penelope said. These people have survived despite centuries of persecution and displacement. Their trust is both gift and obligation. You will honor it, Ethan said with certainty. That is who you are. That is what you do. How can you be so sure? You have known me barely 2 weeks. I have known you long enough to see your character, Ethan replied. You speak of your father teaching you that knowledge is sacred, that artifacts carry stories that matter. Those are not empty words for you. They are principles that guide every action. Penelope turned to look at him, this man who had somehow come to know her so well in such short time. What are we doing, Ethan? This thing between us, it happened so fast. How can we trust feelings that developed so quickly? I do not know that speed invalidates authenticity, Ethan said thoughtfully. My parents met and married within 3 months. My father said he knew immediately that my mother was the person who made sense of his world. They had 30 years together before she died, and he never stopped loving her. You rarely speak of your mother, Penelope observed. She died when I was 12. Fever took her in less than a week, and nothing we did could save her. Ethan's voice roughened with old grief. My father was never the same afterward. The anger that had been occasional became constant. He drank more, laughed less. Everything good in him seemed to die with her. Penelope reached for his hand, offering comfort for a pain she could not fix. I am sorry. That loss must have shaped so much of your life. It taught me that time is uncertain, Ethan replied. That waiting for the perfect moment or the complete certainty might mean missing what matters most. When I find something valuable, I do not want to lose it through hesitation. Are you saying I am something valuable you do not want to lose? Penelope asked, her heart beating faster. I am saying you are remarkable and I am falling in love with you, Ethan said plainly. I know it is fast. I know it defies logic. But I also know it is true, and I would rather speak that truth than hide behind propriety and caution. Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. I am falling in love with you as well, with your thoughtfulness and your ethics, your intelligence and your kindness. You make me want to stay in Texas, to build a life here that includes both my work and something more personal than I have allowed myself to imagine in years. Ethan lifted her hand to his lips again, kissing her knuckles, then her palm, then the inside of her wrist where her pulse beat rapidly. Then stay. Build that life. Let me be part of it. Yes, Penelope whispered. Yes, I will stay. Ethan drew her closer and finally he kissed her. It was gentle at first, questioning, seeking permission even though permission had already been granted. Penelope answered by pressing closer, her hands coming up to frame his face, feeling the slight rasp of his beard against her palms. The kiss deepened, passion rising between them, weeks of restrained attraction finding outlet. Ethan's arms came around her, pulling her against him, and Penelope felt the solid strength of his body, the warmth of him, the rightness of being held this way. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. I want to do this properly. Court you with the respect you deserve. Ask for your hand in marriage when appropriate time has passed and you are certain of your feelings. I am already certain, Penelope said. But I appreciate your consideration of propriety, even if that propriety is somewhat compromised by our current circumstances. Ethan laughed quietly. We are camping alone in the Mexican wilderness, far from any chaperone or social oversight. I suspect propriety was compromised days ago. Then perhaps we should generate a scandal worth the compromise, Penelope suggested boldly, surprised by her own daring. Penelope Brighton, are you proposing we engage in behavior unbefitting your professional status? Ethan's tone was teasing, but his eyes held heat that made her shiver. I am suggesting that I am a grown woman of 24 years, capable of making my own decisions about my personal life," Penelope replied, "and that I trust you completely, and that I want to be close to you in all ways, not merely intellectually." "Are you certain?" Ethan asked seriously. "Because once we cross this line, there is no returning to professional distance." "I do not want professional distance," Penelope said. "I want you." Ethan kissed her again, deeper this time, his hands moving to her hair and loosening the pins that held it in its usual severe arrangement. The dark mass fell around her shoulders, and he made a sound of appreciation, running his fingers through it. What followed was tender and passionate, awkward in moments as they navigated unfamiliar territory, but ultimately profound in its intimacy. Ethan was careful with her, attentive to her responses, ensuring her comfort and pleasure even as they both discovered the depth of their physical connection. Afterward, wrapped in blankets near the dying fire, Penelope felt a contentment she had never experienced. Ethan held her close, his hand tracing idle patterns on her shoulder, and she listened to the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "I love you," Ethan said into the darkness. "I know I said I was falling in love, but I have arrived at that destination. I love you, Penelope, and I want to spend my life with you." "I love you as well," Penelope replied, completely and without reservation. They stayed awake talking for hours, making plans for a future that had seemed impossible 2 weeks ago but now felt inevitable and right. The journey back to Fort Davis took 5 days, as they stopped again at Rosa's ranch to thank her and then traveled more slowly, reluctant to end the journey and return to scrutiny. However, reality could not be avoided indefinitely, and they eventually arrived back at the ranch. Mrs. Garcia took one look at them and smiled knowingly, but said nothing, simply preparing rooms and food as if nothing unusual had occurred. Penelope realized that their feelings must be obvious to anyone with eyes, that the way Ethan looked at her, and she at him likely announced their relationship without need for words. That evening, Ethan formally asked Penelope to marry him, presenting a ring that had belonged to his mother, a simple band set with a small emerald. Penelope accepted with tears of joy, and they spent the night planning a future that combined her professional work with his ranch operations, imagining a life built on partnership and mutual respect. News of their engagement spread quickly through Fort Davis, generating considerable gossip. An educated Boston woman marrying a local rancher raised eyebrows, but the genuine affection visible between them softened most criticism. Mrs. Chen proved particularly pleased, declaring that she had known from the start that Penelope and Ethan were well suited. Penelope wrote to her colleagues in Boston, resigning from her consulting positions and explaining that she would be establishing a new practice in Texas. Some responses expressed disapproval, but others showed support, particularly from the few women in her professional circle who understood the challenges she had faced in the East. The wedding took place 2 months later, in late June of 1879, at the small church in Fort Davis. It was a simple ceremony attended by ranch hands, townspeople, and a few visitors who had traveled from other parts of Texas. Miguel Delgado came with his family, and even Rosa Quintana made the journey from Mexico, bringing a beautiful woven textile as a wedding gift that she said carried blessings for fertility and prosperity. Penelope wore a dress made by a seamstress in town, simple but elegant, and she carried wildflowers gathered from the mountains. Ethan wore a new suit ordered from Austin, and when he saw Penelope walking toward him, his expression held such open love that several women in attendance wiped away tears. They spoke traditional vows, and when Ethan kissed his bride, the small church erupted in applause and cheering. The reception at the ranch featured music, dancing, and food that reflected the cultural diversity of the region. Mexican dishes alongside traditional American fare, with contributions from various ranch families who wanted to celebrate the union. As evening fell and lanterns were lit around the ranch yard, Penelope and Ethan stole a moment alone, walking to a small rise that overlooked the valley. The sounds of celebration drifted up to them, but they had eyes only for each other. "Are you happy?" Ethan asked, holding her close. "Happier than I imagined possible," Penelope replied. "I came to Texas expecting to spend a few days examining artifacts and then return to my solitary life in Boston. Instead, I found love, partnership, and a home. You authenticated something in me that I did not know needed validation, the desire for connection and belonging alongside intellectual achievement. You authenticated something in me as well," Ethan said softly. "The belief that I could be more than just a rancher managing operations. That my mind and my heart both had value. You saw me as a complete person, not just a Western cowboy." "You are a remarkable man, Ethan Sadler," Penelope said. "Cowboy and scholar, rancher and romantic. I love every part of you." "And I love every part of you, Professor Brighton Sadler," Ethan replied, using her newly hyphenated name. They kissed as stars emerged overhead, beginning their married life with the same passion and tenderness that had characterized their courtship. The first years of their marriage established patterns that would define their life together. Penelope created a workspace in the ranch office where she studied the Teopa artifacts, documenting them with meticulous care and writing papers that she submitted to archaeological journals. Her work gained recognition, and other institutions began consulting her about Southwestern cultures, leading to occasional travel for lectures and examinations. Ethan supported her professional endeavors completely, never suggesting that her work should be subordinate to ranch operations. He read her papers, discussed her theories, and took pride in her growing reputation. In turn, Penelope learned the ranch business, keeping books and records, helping with breeding decisions for cattle and horses, and developing genuine appreciation for the complex operations required to maintain a successful ranch. They worked together to establish relationships with the remaining Teopa people, with Rosa Quintana serving as intermediary. Penelope carefully documented oral histories and traditions, creating a record that might preserve knowledge even if the small bands eventually disappeared. She and Ethan donated funds to support the Teopa, discreetly providing resources without demanding anything in return. A year after their marriage, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and in April of 1880 she gave birth to a healthy boy they named Samuel, after Ethan's father, with the middle name Harrison after Penelope's father. The baby had his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair, and both parents were immediately besotted. Motherhood did not end Penelope's professional work, though it did require adjustment. She learned to write papers with a baby on her lap, to examine pottery sherds while Samuel napped nearby, and to balance the demands of scholarship with the needs of an infant. Ethan proved to be a devoted father, taking Samuel on rides around the ranch in a specially designed carrier, teaching his son about the land from the earliest age. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, Elizabeth Ann, named after Ethan's mother. She had her mother's sharp intelligence from an early age, demanding stories and explanations for everything she observed. The house filled with the noise and chaos of young children, and Penelope found that she loved the vibrant messiness of family life alongside her quieter scholarly pursuits. By 1885, the Sadler household consisted of Ethan and Penelope, 6-year-old Samuel, 3-year-old Elizabeth, and a baby boy named Thomas who had arrived earlier that year. The ranch prospered under Ethan's management, and Penelope's reputation as a scholar continued growing, with several museums seeking her authentication services for their southwestern collections. The Teopa artifacts remained in Penelope's care, displayed in a special room at the ranch where visiting scholars could examine them under controlled conditions. Penelope wrote extensively about the Teopa culture, ensuring that their history was recorded and respected, just as she had promised the elder woman years earlier. One evening in autumn of that year, Penelope and Ethan sat on their porch watching the sun set over mountains that had become as familiar as the walls of their home. The children played in the yard under Mrs. Garcia's watchful eye, their laughter carrying on the cool air. "Do you ever regret leaving Boston?" Ethan asked, a question he had not posed in years. Penelope considered. "Sometimes I miss the libraries and the museums, the easy access to other scholars, but I do not regret the choice. My life here is richer than anything I could have built in Boston. I have work that matters, a family I adore, and a partner who makes every day better." "I think about the day your telegram arrived," Ethan said. "How I almost did not send that message, convinced that no expert would travel to remote Texas for artifact authentication. How different our lives would be if I had made a different choice." "We might never have met," Penelope agreed. "You would still be a bachelor rancher, and I would still be a lonely scholar in a cold apartment. Instead, I am a married rancher with 3 children and considerable expertise in pre-Columbian pottery," Ethan said with amusement. "And you are a wife, mother, and scholar who can rope a calf in an emergency." "Life takes unexpected paths," Penelope observed. "I came to authenticate artifacts and ended up authenticating something far more valuable. The genuine heart of a cowboy who happened to also be a thoughtful, educated, ethical man. And I hired someone to authenticate artifacts and discovered that the most genuine and valuable thing in my life would be the woman who came to do that work," Ethan replied. He reached for her hand, and she took it, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of 6 years together. "I love you," Penelope said simply. "I love you," Ethan replied. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness gathered and stars emerged, their children's voices a constant background music, the ranch settling into evening routines that had become as natural as breathing. The life they had built together honored both their individual passions and their shared commitments, creating something stronger than either could have achieved alone. The Teopa artifacts remained under Penelope's care for another 15 years before she arranged for their transfer to a new museum in Austin, dedicated to preserving indigenous cultures of the Southwest. She insisted on several conditions: that Teopa history be presented with complete accuracy and respect, that their contemporary descendants be consulted about all displays and interpretations, and that any profits from related exhibitions be directed to supporting Native communities. The museum agreed to all her terms, and in 1900, Penelope personally oversaw the transfer of the collection. Samuel, now 20 years old and preparing to attend university to study history, assisted her. Elizabeth, 17 and brilliant, had already announced her intention to pursue archaeology professionally, following in her mother's footsteps. Thomas, 15 and more interested in ranching than scholarship, remained at home with Ethan, learning the operations that he would eventually inherit. At the museum opening, Penelope delivered a keynote address about the Teopa culture and the importance of preserving indigenous histories. Among the audience were several Teopa people, including descendants of the elder woman who had met with Penelope 21 years earlier. After the ceremony, a young Teopa woman approached Penelope. "My grandmother spoke of you," the woman said. "She died 3 years ago, but before her death, she told me that you kept your promise, that you honored our people and our story. She said you were a woman of genuine heart and that the mountains had not forgotten." Tears filled Penelope's eyes. "Your grandmother gave me a gift when she trusted me with her people's history. I have tried to be worthy of that trust." "You have been," the young woman said simply. "Thank you." That evening, Penelope and Ethan attended a celebration dinner with Samuel and Elizabeth, toasting accomplishments and future endeavors. Afterward, walking through Austin's streets toward their hotel, Penelope reflected on the path her life had taken. 21 years ago, I arrived in Texas expecting to spend a few days working and then leave," she said to Ethan. "Instead, I found everything that matters: love, family, purpose, and home. 21 years ago, I sent a telegram on a whim, hoping someone might help me understand what I had found," Ethan replied. "I thought I was looking for artifact authentication. I did not realize I was really looking for you." "We have built a good life," Penelope observed. "We have built an excellent life," Ethan corrected. "And we are not finished building yet." Indeed, they were not. The years ahead would bring more grandchildren, more professional achievements, more challenges and triumphs. Elizabeth would become a renowned archaeologist, making discoveries that expanded understanding of Southwestern cultures. Samuel would write historical texts that became standard references in universities. Thomas would transform the ranch into one of the most successful operations in Texas, while maintaining his father's ethical approach to land management. Penelope and Ethan would grow old together, their love deepening rather than fading with time. They would sit on their porch in their 70s, holding hands and watching sunsets as they had done for decades, still talking about artifacts and cattle, children and grandchildren, books and ideas. Ethan would die first, at 78, peacefully in his sleep after a day spent riding the ranch boundaries with Thomas. Penelope would mourn deeply, but without regret, grateful for 52 years of partnership that had exceeded anything she had imagined possible. She would live another 5 years, still working on scholarship until the final weeks, completing a comprehensive history of indigenous cultures in the Davis Mountains that would be published posthumously. Her children and grandchildren would gather around her in those last days, and she would tell them stories of their grandfather, of the artifacts that had brought their parents together, and of the importance of approaching life with curiosity, ethics, and open hearts. On the day Penelope died, at 83 years old, a Teopa delegation would arrive at the ranch to pay respects. They would bring a textile woven with symbols representing Penelope's life: books for knowledge, hearts for love, mountains for home, and stars for the continuation of stories beyond individual lives. But all of that remained in the future on that evening in 1900, when Penelope and Ethan walked through Austin hand in hand, their love as genuine and vital as the day they had first acknowledged it in Mexican mountains 21 years earlier. The story of how they met, how artifacts had led to authentication of something far more valuable than cultural heritage, would become family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren. It was a story of intellect meeting integrity, of two lonely people finding completion in each other, of professional collaboration transforming into personal devotion. It was a story of the West in all its complexity, beautiful and harsh, isolated and connected, traditional and progressive. Most importantly, it was a story of love, the kind that happens rarely and means everything. And it was, in every way that mattered, completely and genuinely authentic.